There are moments in life that change everything, moments that can make or break a person, mold them into who they were always meant to be, or shatter their dreams into a million tiny pieces. For Zariah, this moment was just beginning to unfold. Zariah had been blind for as long as she could remember. The world had always been a place of sounds, smells, and textures, a world that in many ways felt richer to her than it did to those with sight. She had learned to navigate her surroundings with ease, to read Braille, to listen for the subtle echoes of her environment. But most of all, Zariah had always found solace in music. Music was her language, her escape, her home. Growing up in a small, modest apartment in the heart of Chicago, Zariah's family had struggled. Her mother, a single parent, worked tirelessly as a janitor to provide for her and her younger brother Malik. Zariah's world, though dim, was filled with warmth, laughter, and the constant hum of the piano her mother had gifted her on her 7th birthday. It was an old, worn instrument, but to Zariah it was priceless. Every note she played, every chord she struck, was an expression of the emotions she couldn't always put into words. Her talent was undeniable. Zariah had a natural gift for the piano. She could hear the music in her soul, and when her fingers touched the keys, it felt as though they were speaking a language only she could understand. She was no ordinary pianist. Even without sight, Zariah could play any piece she heard, be it classical, jazz, or contemporary, without ever having seen a single sheet of music. The melodies flowed from her fingertips as though they were born of the air around her. But in the world of music, talent alone was never enough. It was a world that often favored the privileged, those with the right connections and the right opportunities. Zariah was well aware of this. She knew that to make it, she would need more than just skill. She would need recognition. She would need someone to believe in her. And so, when her mother saved up enough money to send her to a prestigious music academy, Zariah was both excited and nervous. The academy was renowned for producing some of the greatest pianists in the world. It was a place where the best of the best honed their craft. But it was also a place where people like Zariah were often overlooked, where the color of her skin and her blindness would set her apart in ways she couldn't change. Her first day at the academy was a whirlwind of emotions. The grand hallways, filled with portraits of famous composers and musicians, made her feel both small and insignificant. The students were mostly from affluent families, and many of them were already accomplished pianists. Zariah couldn't help but feel out of place, her worn shoes and faded clothes a stark contrast to the polished uniforms and expensive accessories that adorned the other students. But there was one name she had heard whispered more than others: Leonard Trent, a world-renowned pianist, a virtuoso whose performances left audiences in awe. He was known for his genius on the piano, but also for his arrogance. Leonard was a perfectionist, a man whose disdain for anything less than flawless performance had earned him both admiration and scorn. He was a star, unreachable, untouchable, and Zariah had heard more than a few rumors about his disdain for anyone he deemed unworthy of his time. The Academy had announced that Leonard Trent would be conducting a masterclass for the students. It was an opportunity of a lifetime, one that could catapult a young pianist into stardom or destroy them if they failed to meet his impossibly high standards. The day of the masterclass arrived, and Zariah found herself standing nervously outside the auditorium. Her fingers twitched at her sides, longing to feel the familiar keys of the piano. She had practiced for days, preparing a piece she knew would impress Leonard, though she had no illusions about what would happen when she took the stage. She was an outsider in every sense of the word, black, blind, and from a background that was nothing like the other students at the academy. When Zariah entered the auditorium, the silence was almost deafening. The students were already seated, each with their instrument of choice, waiting for their turn to be judged by Leonard. Zariah walked to the piano at the center of the stage, feeling the cool surface of the keys beneath her fingers. She adjusted herself, her heart pounding in her chest, and waited for Leonard to give her the nod to begin. Leonard Trent stood at the front of the room, a tall figure with sharp features and piercing eyes. His expression was one of quiet disdain, as though he were constantly judging the world around him. His gaze swept over Zariah, lingering for a moment on her blindfold before he spoke. "Well, Miss Williams," Leonard said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'm sure this will be an interesting performance. Let's see what you've got." Zariah swallowed her nerves and nodded, taking a deep breath before her fingers hovered over the keys. The music she had prepared for this moment was one of Beethoven's most challenging pieces, a test of both technique and emotional depth. Zariah knew the music well. She had spent countless hours memorizing the movements, listening to the nuances of the melody, letting the notes guide her. Now was the time to prove herself. She began to play. The room fell into silence as the first notes filled the space. Zariah's fingers moved with confidence, each stroke of the keys a perfect replica of the piece she had practiced so diligently. The sounds echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls, and for a brief moment, Zariah felt the world around her fade away. It was just her and the music. But then, just as she was about to reach the crescendo, she felt it, Leonard's cold, critical gaze. She could almost hear the sneer in his thoughts, the judgment building in the air around her. The music faltered for a brief moment. Zariah's heart skipped, but she quickly regained her composure, pushing through the uncertainty. She had come too far to let anyone shake her. When the final note lingered in the air, Zariah held her breath. There was a long silence. Leonard's expression was unreadable, but Zariah knew. She could feel it. The room was thick with tension. Well, Leonard finally spoke, his voice sharp. That was passable, I suppose, but not remarkable. "Your technique is competent, but it lacks depth. Emotion. You're playing the notes, but not the music." Zariah's heart sank. She had tried so hard, and yet, in Leonard's eyes, it wasn't enough. Her mind raced, the sting of his words piercing through her resolve. Was this it? Was this the best she could do? And then, just as the room began to buzz with hushed whispers, something inside Zariah snapped. She wasn't going to let this man define her, not today, not ever. With a surge of determination, Zariah closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, her fingers finding the keys again, but this time, she played a different song, one that wasn't on the sheet music, a melody that came from the very core of her being. It was a song of her own, one that combined her pain, her triumphs, and the truth of who she was. The notes flowed like a river, powerful and raw, a reflection of her soul. The room went completely still. For the first time, Leonard Trent's face shifted. His eyes widened, and the cold facade that he always wore began to crack. Zariah's music was like nothing he had ever heard before. It was unpolished, imperfect, but it was real. It was the sound of a woman who had fought her way to the top against all odds. When the last note faded into silence, Zariah opened her eyes. The room was stunned. Leonard stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar. It was a moment of pure disbelief, as if he had been struck by something greater than mere technical skill. He slowly began to clap, his slow, deliberate applause echoing in the stillness. "Well," Leonard said, his voice barely audible, that was something else. Zariah didn't need his approval. She had proven something far more important, to herself. And in that moment, the world began to change. Stay tuned for more inspiring moments and incredible stories. Subscribe to expect stories and never miss a chapter.